Hey guys, and welcome back to the Gen Z stage. I'm your host, I'm your MC, and I've been saying that it's been lit. It has literally been an amazing morning so far. So welcome back. Obviously now it's afternoon, so good afternoon. My name's Hayley Melenda. I'm your MC. I'm an international keynote speaker, author, and change agent, and I'm also an ambassador of One Young World. So super excited to be your host today and be your MC. And now we're about to introduce your next moderator, who is Clementine. And she's about to delve into a topic that I'm very, very passionate about. Is tech the future of mental health care? I love mental health, everything to do with mental health. So I'm super excited for this. So Clementine, over to you.
Thank you, Hayley. And thank you everyone who is joining us for this session. It's a shame that we can't see you or be with you, but we hope that this is going to be an insightful 2 hours. So as Hayley mentioned, the subject that we're going to be exploring today is mental health and how we may be able to utilize technology to solve the mental health crisis. So the crisis has been well documented, and research shows that rates of depression and anxiety are skyrocketing for Gen Z. However, access to care is limited, waiting lists are incredibly long, and multiple reports suggest that there will never be enough human therapists to help people. So this panel is going to explore if technology is our best solution and how explore the different ways in which technology might be able to help the current crisis. So I am going to hand over to begin with to Courtney, CEO of Paradym, who is going to give us a keynote, and then we're going to move to a brilliant expert of mental health panelists.
Thank you so much, Clemmy. As she mentioned, I'm Courtney Carlsson, Paradym founder and CEO. And today I want to talk about where we are today in terms of tech, where we need to be, and the role and responsibility of ethics in this discussion. So I want to start with a story. I want to tell you about Sarah, who's one of the Paradym users. And Sarah came to us last year looking for some more content. She had used what was meant to be 15 days worth of content in one single sitting. So I opened up a dialogue with Sarah to learn a little bit more about her and how she was using Paradym. And she was very open with me. She told me about her anxiety and confidence issues that she'd had since she was a child. She talked to me about her background. She was a nurse in Public Health UK, and she'd recently been diagnosed with borderline disorder. She found Paradym by searching on the App Store, and Paradym wasn't the only app that she was using. She was actually using a plethora of apps, and she would go on the App Store on a regular basis just to find additional support. So clearly the support she was receiving on a weekly basis in terms of her group therapy wasn't enough for her. She'd managed to secure this spot in group therapy, which was great, but she was actually also suffering from a burnout, so she really needed some additional help. So if Gen Z is turning to tech for much needed support, shouldn't it be trusted and ethical? And this is a really central question to what we want to talk about today. And what I mean by ethical is I mean user-centric, so with the user's best interests at heart, radically transparent, so being clear about what kind of approach you're taking, what kind of tech you're using, and how you're using the data, and evidence-based, so using the science. And this last point is really important because we're seeing that a lot of apps that are coming onto the App Store and available for us to use, they aren't actually doing what they claim to do. And this is a central issue in mental health tech because if we're getting more clinical issues, more people that are depressed with more serious issues, we need to be able to tell them how this app is going to work and why it's going to work. But also if they have issues with the app and how it's working, it might actually cause them to have deeper issues using the app. So we really need to be careful about the claims that we're making and how we're building these apps. What are the options aside from tech? So Clemmy talked about therapy. There's one-to-one or group work, and therapy is a wonderful option, but it's expensive. And also there just aren't enough therapists in the world to take care of the people that are suffering. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. There are meds, but these don't work for everybody. Or there's nothing, which isn't really an option, but unfortunately it is an option for many of the people that are suffering from mental health issues. So I want you to think about 5 people in your life. They could be siblings or colleagues or family. Think of those 5 people. And now out of those 5 people, at least one of them is going to be affected with a mental health disorder on average. So now I want you to take that one person and think about your wider community, your wider network. And I want you to think about this wider network and multiply that one person by 100. So out of all the people that you know, there are most likely 100 people that you know that are also suffering from mental health issues. Currently, in the way that things are working now, only 9 out of those 100, 9 out of those 100 people are actually receiving treatment. That is not very many at all. So 91 could be suffering in silence. That's a huge amount of people, and also globally it equates to about 1.6 billion people. So the problem is quite serious. Now, we're seeing an increase now with the current situation in terms of lockdown and COVID-19. And on a recent study, we're seeing that people are feeling more anxious, they're feeling more emotionally exhausted, and they're feeling really sad on a day-to-day basis. These are all symptoms of burnout, which is closely linked with depression. So this is something we really need to be taking care of. And why are we talking about this on the Gen Z stage if it affects all of us? Well, we know from the science that about half of mental health problems will develop by the age of 14. But beyond that, Gen Z as a generation, they're experiencing more mental health issues generally. They're also seeing higher rates of depression, and there are also higher rates of suicide. So why is tech the answer for iGen? Well, iGen is called iGen because they're always using their iPhones. They use their iPhones to socialize. They use their iPhones for living their life. Their reality is a mixture of online and in real life. Some of them even sleep next to their iPhones. So if this is where this generation is going to be, we need to actually meet them where they are. And that is why tech is the answer for iGen. Now, there is an argument that tech can actually cause issues. And I think when we think about this argument in terms of, if we use tech to go onto social media, to do things like social comparisons, yes, it can cause a problem. But that's not the tech itself that's causing the issue. It's the way that it's being used. So where are we with mental health tech today? There are the platforms. These are things like telehealth and other therapy platforms where people can find therapists. And this is maximizing the operational efficiency of finding a therapist, but it still doesn't solve the problem that there aren't enough human therapists to support the 1.6 billion people looking for mental health care. Then there are the wearables, and we're making a lot of progress here. You can find a headband that tells you the quality of your brain waves. You can find hardware that tells you how you feel. Now, with wearables, if someone has a more serious issue like depression, if the wearable tells you that you're depressed, how is that actually helpful? What are the next steps for the user? And then there are the apps, and we've touched on this idea of science versus no science. And I think if we're going to be able to tackle the problem for a large body of people, the science becomes really pivotal. Again, we need to be very clear in terms of what we're providing our users with and how they can use it effectively. So it really boils down to the how. How are we building these tech solutions? Tech is the answer, but how are we building the solutions? So I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples. I want to think about this idea of user-centric, evidence-based, and radical transparency. So the solution in terms of what is the actual psychological process that's being built into the tech? Does it have the user's best interest in mind? We need to be thinking about data and privacy. How are we ensuring that our users' best interests are safeguarded? And also, how are we using the data? Is it being used ethically and responsibly? And we'll walk through a little bit more of that. So in terms of the data and privacy side at Paradym, we actually don't share, we will never sell the data, but also the most private data that our users have. We have a notes functionality where you can write personal notes. We actually don't have access to that at all. And I think that's something that a lot of solutions should be thinking about in terms of how are you building this with the user's best interest in mind. On the AI side, there's, I think there's a lot of really interesting progress being made here. And we're seeing, for example, chatbots that are trying to therapize us, which I think is amazing progress. However, and we'll hear a little bit more from an expert in this, from Maria Lehl, the actual tech is not quite so sophisticated. So we need to be thinking about the user experience. Is a chatbot that's not sensitive enough, is that right for the population that's using it? And so this is the idea of being user-centric, but also being radically transparent. So we need to be, if we're going to be putting chatbots out there, we also need to be clear about where the data is coming from, informing the chatbot. We need to be clear about any potential data biases. So, for example, most of the psychological research out there currently, historically, has been done on white males. So that just needs to be, we need to be very clear about the progress that we're making, how we're making things. And so it comes back to this point again. I asked at the beginning, is tech our best solution to the Gen Z mental health crisis? And the answer is yes, but it fundamentally depends on these 3 items and how we're actually creating the solutions. And it needs to be user-centric, evidence-based, and radically transparent. Thank you so much. I'm Courtney Carlsson, founder and CEO of Paradym, an emotional identity coaching app rooted in evidence-based science. And I'm now going to hand you off to Clemmy, who's our community manager. And we're going to be having a wonderful panel discussion with our 3 panelists, Vicki Uwannah, who is a therapist, Esme Dunn, who is a Gen Z herself and an activist, and Maria Lehl, who is our NLP engineer and cognitive scientist. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Courtney. And thank you for those brief introductions. I just want to go into a little bit more detail because our experts are brilliant, and I think their backgrounds and what they can bring to the discussion today is really important to note. So to begin with, Maria Lehl is a cognitive scientist, machine learning and natural language processing engineer who has experience working in information extraction for deeper insights, as well as most recently in healthcare for Babylon Health. Dr. Vicki Uwannah is a chartered counselling psychologist. Her therapy background spans working within the NHS to the education sector, working with both primary and secondary schools. She is currently working in private practice and is a residing therapist at the School of Life. And finally, Esme Dunn, who, as Courtney said, is our Gen Zer. And I would just like to read a little bit about her experiences with mental health, because I think it really brings the subject that we're exploring today to the fore. So throughout Esme's life, she has faced a myriad of different mental health issues, from anxiety and panic disorder and depression to anorexia and bulimia. And this is far from rare amongst her peers. In Gen Z, whole friendship groups cover ranges of issues from substance abuse to suicide. Closest to her heart are eating disorders, which, coming from an all-girls school, are almost competitive sports. Esme is currently her school's president of Empower Her Voice, which aims to raise awareness and create space for discussion around mental health, as well as exploring other issues such as intersectional feminism and shared parenting. Throughout years of treatment, her mental health has drastically improved, sparking a passion to increase conversation about it. So I think that's the perfect segue into the discussion. And I really would like to begin the discussion with a sort of an overarching question, which to begin with, I think I'd like to direct to Vicki, which is why? Why are we seeing such high rates of mental health generally, but specifically for Gen Z?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the popular answers has been social media, the rise in social media, the rise in just that very transparent, very open comparison that people have with each other. But I don't think social media is, I don't think there's one thing that is the only answer to that question. I think there are lots of different things. I'm just thinking about my time in schools, where I have seen increasing pressure on children to do well, to perform. I've seen pressure on teachers to get results, and that can cascade down. I think there is just generally a lot of pressure on this generation. As we know more, I think we kind of expect people to do better. We expect this generation to be faster, to be smarter, to have, they have all the resources that other previous generations didn't have. And there's just an overarching expectation that this generation are supposed to be at the forefront. They're supposed to know exactly what they're doing, to have all the answers. And I think that is just too much. And it's taken place on a platform where everyone can see what everyone else is doing. And it kind of invites comparison, it invites competition, and looking at yourself and thinking, am I as good as the person next to me? Can I aspire to be like my idol that I see on TV or I see on my iPhone? So I think that is one of the main contributing factors, as well as just the increasing pressure that this generation are facing.
Brilliant, thank you, Vicki. And I'd love to put the question to you, Esme. Vicki mentioned social media and increased pressure, comparisons. Is that something that you'd say yourself and your peers experience?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the issue is that there's social media can be such a brilliant thing for truth. Like we've seen that in the last couple of weeks with the Black Lives Matter movement. You're not seeing anything on the news or the media, but you're seeing truth, and you're seeing, the peaceful side of the protests and the events in America and across the world as well. But then there's also this aspect of you can follow absolutely anyone you want, and you don't have to know them, and they're, I'm sure, showing the best parts of their life, and you think that your life is little in comparison. Where of course, everybody feels the same way about that. Everyone looks at someone else and feels little side by side. So I think while that it can be a really great thing for change through that truthfulness, there's also that aspect of it feels like everyone's lying, and it feels like you're lying, because if you're not being 100% honest, if you're not giving all the bad aspects of your life, it's like you're sugarcoating the bad bits. So I think that is an issue. But then there's also really great opportunity for change. A lot of my peers, everyone's interested in initiatives mental health because everyone's suffering so much more. And so there's also acts as a support network as well. So there's really good parts to it. I think sometimes it gets a really bad rep.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a really interesting point, and it bridges us to the next question, which is that technology has given rise to this truth and transparency. So social media as a platform is enabling people, it's giving people a voice. And that voice is partly the reason why we're hearing people talk about their mental health struggles. It perhaps in the same vein is also the cause, but we're here to talk about the potential benefits or the potential opportunities of technology and helping mental health. So I would love to know what you think from some of the things that Courtney said. We talked about accessibility. Gen Z are known as iGen because of this, 24/7 attachment to their phones. Where you kind of think the potential opportunities for technological interventions could be. I'm going to throw that one over to you, Maria.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so one big advantage, I guess, of people expressing themselves a lot online is that you can see early digital biomarkers of mental health states and how they degrade over time, possibly what sort of initiative you get involved in, whether you post on social media and maybe recognize, but by expressing yourself a lot online, you can recognize also risks, right? From the social media posts, you can use, for example, natural language processing to recognize early signs of suicidal tendencies. So just to sort of clarify what natural language processing is, just to be clear, we're all speaking the same language. It's sort of the intersection between computer science, linguistics, and artificial intelligence. So how can we build applications that are, that work with natural language, that understand natural language, that can generate natural language? So we're talking about search engines or chatbots, for example. In this context, of course, you can use, you can track a person's behavior on social media to recognize that they are surrounding themselves with maybe slightly not, with groups of people that are maybe not a very good influence for their mental health. You can see patterns of their behavioral, of the digital behavior, if they're online a lot, for example, that concluding that they might become isolated. So there is, because you use a smartphone for everything, you can basically employ all sorts of sensors. You can use movement sensors, light sensors, how you interact with your phone, even your calendar data, to see sort of biomarkers of what mental state you're in.
Thank you, Vicki. I'd love for you to hear your perspective on what you think the potential opportunities are. So you, of course, have brought up this point that technology and media, social media, can be and have a negative impact on mental health. But building on what Vicki has, Maria has explored, what do you think could be some potential benefits?
I think the benefits are huge, but I also think we need to define how tech can be used to support mental health. If we're thinking about it as a complete replacement, I don't think that's the way forward. I think it has to be a supplement, it has to be a tool, and I think it can be really useful to streamline maybe access into services. It can be really useful in picking up some, mental health deterioration and signaling, oh, okay, someone needs to check in with this individual to see how they're doing. I think it can be really beneficial. If we think about how many people are in need of therapy or in need of mental health services, but yet our waiting lists are so long, and if you want to go down the private route, not everyone has the funds to support that or to access private therapy. So I think it can be really useful as a tool. And when we think about mental health, we also have to separate the different populations, but because we have a clinical population, so those can fall under the category of being mentally have a diagnosis, clinically depressed, or those who have schizophrenia, psychosis, versus those of us who struggle with our mental well-being on a day-to-day basis, but may not necessarily meet the clinical definition or the diagnosis of a mental health disorder. And I think tech can actually be useful, really useful for the latter, for those of us who may have periods where we're feeling really overwhelmed or stressed. We may be going through like bereavement and we're struggling with like the loss of someone. We may have periods where we're feeling down, we're struggling, we're transitioning from different periods of our lives. And I think tech can be really useful for that group of people. It can be useful to think of providing tools. So whether that's self-help, online courses, even accessing therapy via Messenger or online therapy like we do at the School of Life. I think tech can be really useful for that group of people also.
Esme, I would just love to go to you and hear about your experiences, if you have used any sort of tech-enabled or any mental health chatbots, anything, any kind of tech, your experience of mental health and tech, or mental health care as technology.
Well, in the midst of my various mental health issues, when it was at its worst, I had quite severe insomnia, and I found that listening to sleep stories helps so much. And I also found that, like, as a habit, if I went to sleep having a panic attack or anxious, I'd wake up having a panic attack, which isn't, always the best start to your day. So listening to a sleep story, even when I was asleep, still listening to it would really calm me down, so I wouldn't have an anxiety dream or anything like that. So I always used the app Calm, which I also meditated on, and that I found to be a really great resource. My sister, who is is now struggling, like 2 years later than me, with almost very, very similar issues with quite severe anxiety. She uses Headspace. And that's really great because it has emergency meditations. So it has 2-minute walkthroughs. So if she's having a severe panic attack, or kind of having like an episode where just like, nothing seems right and like you can't help because she's in such a bad space, putting on a 2-minute emergency meditation it's almost like magic. So I think in that sense, you can see that tech really does have an upper hand on us in some ways, because I can talk to her for hours and it won't affect her, and then that little 2 minutes can just change her whole day. So actually, you find the right side of tech and you find the right, and I think you're right. I think, as Vicki said, it is supplementary. It's not the whole thing, but it's definitely got things that we don't have.
I want to move to talk about some of the barriers of using technology to treat mental health. And I think Courtney mentioned that in terms of kind of chatbots, and Maria, you mentioned with natural language processing, there are vast potential opportunities, but perhaps things are not quite as sophisticated as they should be yet. And instead we're kind of focusing on streamlining access. So it's about how can we get access to those tools at the moment, and potentially further down the line we'll be at that point. But I have this question here, which was, can tech replace a human to human kind of therapeutic relationship? And I think we've already answered that by saying, we're unanimous in saying no, it's supplementary. But I'd really like to explore, I suppose, the nuances of that, and go to you, Maria, particularly with your background in cognitive science, to kind of understand how you think we could perhaps play with some of the kind of cognitive processes, and how we could potentially use that, and how you could see that playing out in the future.
Well, that kind of leads me back a little bit to chatbots, and also what Vicki said, that basically there's a clinical context, and there is a kind of self-help, self-care program context. And right now, they are sometimes merged. They start to sort of merge, but they're not quite there yet. But technically, it's all one transition, right? You start with some minor sort of negative thoughts, and that becomes like growth into a clinical condition, in most cases at least, right? So I think from a cognitive perspective, it makes a lot of sense to start thinking of technology, like Vicki said, as an aid in the chatbot setting, for example, where maybe as a mental health care professional, you are usually would be having one-to-one chats, but you would be able, by using a chatbot that is sort of semi-automated, which is maybe not as context aware, not as patient aware as you are, maybe you could sort of like merge that boundary between the automatic chatbot and jump in sort of at the places where you think that actually human interaction is the right decision there. So that's sort of one thing. And another thing, I guess, is that self-care programs and all of this technology, social media, peer-to-peer support, this is all basically one big machine that we can kind of all merge together with clinical psychology to provide the support that we need, right? It's basically what we need in the long run is more of a full stack solution where AI is optimizing the process, where AI is actually maybe also helping mental health professionals in the context of electronic health records, optimizing the process of documenting. I guess I got carried away a little bit, but does that sort of answer your question?
It does, thank you. I want to explore some of the barriers in a little bit more detail, and something that Courtney also touched on was data bias, and the problem of we know that a lot of the technology industry is dominated by kind of very unitary, it's very singular, white men, and there are issues if we are building technology that these people are going to be putting their own biases, building it into the technology. I would love to hear from you again, Maria, about what your perspective is on that, and what you think some of the solutions to it could be.
Right. Yes. So algorithmic bias is a very, very big problem right now, because our models are growing bigger and bigger. So what sort of, when ML started, most of the models were machine learning. When machine learning started, most of the models were very interpretable, and you could sort of see why decisions were being made. And the more tech sort of grew out with the increased popularity of deep learning, models have become more like black boxes, very obscure, very complex. And at some point, it became really, really difficult to determine why a model is actually better than another, and why it makes a certain decision. So algorithmic bias is basically when a model makes systematically the same kind of error. And most of the time we talk about it is when it's in the context of discrimination, because we don't want that to happen. So, for example, if you want to predict whether somebody has depression from their speech, and you put in a data set that consists mainly of depressed women and not depressed men, then the algorithm will be biased to predict that being a woman makes me more likely being depressed. And if you answer a questionnaire exactly the same as a man or a woman, it might actually lead you to a situation where it says, like, okay, as a woman you are depressed, as a man you aren't. And that is a problem. So that puts a lot of pressure on the companies that deliver the models, of course, because they don't want to release their proprietary software. They don't want other people to inspect how exactly they implemented things. But at the same time, they have the responsibility of auditing this. They can, for example, actually audit the data that goes in, because bias most of the time comes from the data that goes in, and the data is biased. If it's clean data, you're less likely to receive a bias. They can audit the whole system, the model that they've trained, by having extra tests, like tested inputs, outputs for different cultural groups, demographics, and so on. Another way of mitigating that is actually having diversity in the workplace amongst engineers. The problem is that software engineers are mostly white males. So it's often just sort of forgotten in the implementation. And at the moment, there's actually a lot of research happening in explainable AI, which is amazing, because we want to be using deep learning models more and more. That kind of puts the pressure on the researchers to actually making them explainable, because in a lot of settings, you just absolutely can't use obscure models. And so one sort of technological solution for explainability of deep learning models is, for example, and this is just an example, is using surrogate models. So you train, surrogate models mean you train, basically first you have your unexplainable model, the really complex one that's a black box. You train it on some data, and then you train another model that is explainable to predict, to behave in exactly the same or similar ways as the complex model. And by having that interpretable model, you can sort of roughly see what the other model is probably doing. It might be performing a little worse, but yeah. So this is sort of one way of dealing with it.
Thank you. I want to now move on to thinking about something that we mentioned earlier, which was safeguarding. And I suppose some of the potential kind of psychological and potentially, worsening people's conditions. Vicki, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. If you think whether it is an app or seeking advice online, or seeking advice from a chatbot, if you think this has the potential, or what the potential negative psychological impacts may be. I realize on a hierarchy of technologies.
Yeah, I think with technology, there's always a room for error, right? There's always a room for failure, or for something in the system to stop working, or for someone to be missed. So I think that would be the danger in purely relying on chatbots tech to kind of catch and really understand the nuances of someone's mental health and their mental health state. So I think there could be potential for people to get missed. For someone who is highlighting that maybe they're feeling suicidal, or they're engaging in really risky self-harm behaviour, and if that's not picked up, then what happens? So I think that we can't really escape the need for community and for holding people and you know, when I think about when I'm having a bad day, some of my friends that I talk to every single day, they'll hear it in my voice. They'll pick up on it very quickly, even though I may not be saying anything differently, but it's because they know me. They know the different nuances. They know what I'm like when I'm feeling on top of the world. And so I don't think we can kind of escape having a community or a containment for people to feel contained, whether that's like their mental health team, whether that's their family, their friends at school, as well as the use of technology. We need to be able to know people and to be able to pick up on the different fluctuations and just have that safety net around people. So I guess when I'm thinking about risk in terms of using tech, I'm thinking about, okay, what about the people that may be missed? What about the people that go under the radar? Or maybe even, you know, they may not even say that they're feeling suicidal, but they commit suicide, and then questions are asked, you know, like, so I think I think we have to be realistic with tech, and we can't just assume that it will be like a catch-all. Yeah, we have to be realistic about it, and we have to see it as a supplement, as we've been saying. But we can't really forego human connections and just having that sense of community and containment, whether family, friends, teachers, you know.
Yeah. I have a note telling you we've got 5 minutes to go. I did just have one question I want to ask before the final one, and I think that's the perfect segue. Thank you, Vicki, because we are currently conducting this panel discussion using technology because of the pandemic. And of course, for a lot of us, we haven't been able to see loved ones and we haven't been able to connect with them. You know, we're losing a lot of that kind of sense of community and connection, and we are having to rely on technology in the meantime. This panel is, of course, about Gen Z and how tech can help Gen Z specifically, but I wanted to ask you, Esme, I think a lot of generations have been forced to become tech savvy. Gen Z, iGen are known to be digital natives, but I wanted to know if, you know, for your parents, for example, if you're finding that they're utilizing technology more, and if you think they would be open to mental health care online or digitally enabled.
My dad, he works from home, but he normally goes to London for work like once a week. So it's been a very big difference for him always being at home, and I think he's fallen in love with Zoom, and that has helped him a lot. So I think in terms of that, they've both had to, I don't live with my mum, but I think not being with her, she's had to kind of be a bit more open to technology too. But it's a curious question to see if they'd be so open to therapy online. I can imagine that my dad would be, but I don't think that's because it's online. I think that's because he would be more open to it anyway. I know that my mum has in recent years been to therapy, and she stopped, which, you know, I probably wouldn't have said she should have done. So I wonder if she would be more open to therapy on an app because it's less invasive.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think an issue with that, I think, I remember talking to some of my friends about it when we were taking part in interviewing a new therapist at school. And we were thinking, how do you get somebody that is sitting there in front of you and is obviously struggling with something, but can't vocalize it, doesn't want to, burden you with it? Can technology help with that? Because it's an app, it's not making you do anything. Like, if you're not going to put the information down on the page, but then on the other hand, maybe you're more happy to because you're not burdening anyone's emotions.
We've got 2 minutes to go, so I'm going to have to stop you there. I have a final question for everyone, so I'm going to need your answers in 30 seconds each, which is to round us up, what is the future of mental health care in relation to technology? Where do we think technology is going to be in 10 years from now? I'm going to go to you, Maria, to begin with.
Well, I think it will be a fusion of more efficient healthcare professionals and more advanced tech. Maybe also some twists on like virtual reality therapy, these sort of things, if we're speaking like further future.
But I think there's also the aspect of possibly peer therapy. 2 weeks ago, I took part in mental health first aid training. And if that became the norm, like with physical first aid training, I think that you see a lot less therapy and a lot less like peer review almost.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. I do believe I'm handing back to Hayley now, and I think in a moment or 15 minutes we'll be jumping over to the Q&A session, but hopefully Hayley will let us know.
Hi. That was an amazing discussion, so much insight. Thank you so much, ladies. That was amazing, especially because, as I did highlight before, that mental health is something that I'm very passionate about. So it's interesting to see the insights and just hear what everyone had to say regarding that. So now we're about to move on to the Q&A, which I'm super, super excited about because you guys more or less get to ask your questions and have, just being able to really get more insight in the way that you guys want insight. So thank you so much for everyone that's been tuning in so far. So I'm going to introduce Clemmie back again, who's going to come and introduce the people who are going to be doing the Q&A and taking part in the Q&A. And I'm super excited. I hope you guys are going to, really engage in that.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.